And I want to express my appreciation to you as I drove through campus to see the condition of the campus, to see how you keep the campus up. I'm very impressed. It is something that we fought for many years in the courts of this state to try to make certain that our HBCUs live up to the expectations of any other universities, not only in the state, but in this nation. But the fight for education in this state has certainly been a tremendous fight that we had to live with for many years. And I think most of you know that from the beginning of time, blacks or African Americans, whatever we want to be called at whatever time in history, was the education of us was kept very close to the bosom of whites. They would not allow, for some reason, they would not allow blacks to be educated in the state of Alabama. And that's a fight that we had to fight all the way in the court in terms of the lawsuit that we were in. And in order to win that lawsuit, we had to go back, and I challenge each of you to read the decision of Judge Harold Murphy. Now, it's not an easy decision to read because it's a total of about 845 pages. But it'll be worth your time because in order to win this case, we had to go back and trace the history of education in the state of Alabama. In so doing, it was not as difficult as a lot of people thought because when you put the facts out there, in terms of education, the state had no defense for what had taken place in Alabama. Everything our historians came up with as it relates to blacks and education in Alabama, the beginning of education, the beginning of Alabama State and A&M, we just were able to stipulate that in court. And that means that they accepted it because the state, they couldn't defend it because it was what actually happened. And that's the reason that it made it easier, even though it was hard and a long fought battle for us to win that case. I'll start by saying that, I quote Harry Truman, who said, "Progress occurs when courageous and skillful leaders seize the opportunity to change things for the better." And I think that that must continue to take place. The vision of Alabama State and Alabama A&M University motivated me as a young person at that particular time and other university leaders, alumni, supporters, and students to initiate a lawsuit to bring about a change needed to make a vision of these institutions a reality. And I want to express my appreciation to the plaintiffs from A&M. I don't know all of the names at this date, but I do know the lead plaintiff was Miss Alice Sims. And she got upset with me sometime because I tell the story of what we had to do, and I was the lead plaintiff from Alabama State. I tell the story about what we had to do. We had to sue the state of Alabama. And we really didn't have the money to take on a challenge such as that. So Elise had fish fries, she had ticket sales, she had all kind of things to raise money. And some of the lawyers that were representing us, they were doing it pro bono. Well, not pro bono, but if they won, they would get reimbursed. If they didn't, they would not get reimbursed. So we had to raise money to take care of the consultants and the things that we needed to try to get this case going. So that was a tremendous task, and you had a group of strong graduates of A&M that joined together with the graduates from Alabama State to bring this suit to the courts and to try to get some justice when it comes to education. We took the position and we looked at Alabama State and A&M, and we said that these are our flagship universities. What do I mean by that? I mean that the state of Alabama years ago, when you go back through the history, they created University of Alabama as a flagship, and they created Auburn as a flagship. And they created Alabama State and Alabama A&M as the schools for blacks or Negroes or whatever you want to be called at that particular time. We took the position that we were entitled to the same thing that they were entitled to when they were created, but we never got what they got in terms of state appropriation and funding. That the state of Alabama had given Alabama State and Alabama A&M a bad check. And we came to cash in on that check in this lawsuit. So that's what In layman's terms, that's basically the approach that we took relative to the lawsuit that was filed. The lawsuit was about having the resources and the opportunity to build the best universities that we could build as HBCUs. Living that vision is what we always wanted and why we kept pushing forward through the length of time of that particular lawsuit. We didn't want someone else to do our work or to build our dream. We wanted the opportunity to do it ourselves. The task has been more complex than anyone thought it would be, to include myself, I don't mind telling you. When it became clear that the state and the universities were planning no voluntary actions to desegregate, a legal defense fund was set up at Alabama State as well as Alabama A&M. That was in 1980. And the reason that we came to that decision was because in 1981, the federal government notified the state of Alabama that they were in violation of certain constitutional amendments when it comes to education. And the state of Alabama just ignored it. So we know when they ignore that something had to be done. President Watkins was the president of Alabama State at that particular time. I was an employee at Alabama State. He asked me to serve as the lead plaintiff in this particular lawsuit with the goal of ending the vestiges of segregation and funding for higher education in Alabama. Now, when I took and agreed with Dr. Watkins that I would be the lead plaintiff, I had no idea that we would be in court this length of time. I mean, this case started in 1981. We filed the initial case. It was January 15th, 1981 in Montgomery, Alabama. When we filed the lawsuit, it was Knight v. James. James was the governor of the state of Alabama at the time that the state was notified that they were not in compliance with the vestige, rid the state of the vestiges of education, of higher education. I was 35, I'm giving my age, I was 35 years of age at that time. And if I had known, if I had known at that time that it was going to take that long to process this case through the state of Alabama, I questioned whether I would have agreed to be the lead plaintiff because it took a great portion of my adult life in court. And I never had any plans to stay in court that length of time for any particular issue. But now I think that it was worth it, and I'm glad that I was able to do it. The case was and is so important. At the inception, it focused on the allegation of racism and state policies that either prevented or critically limited educational opportunities for blacks in Alabama. We knew that in order for black citizens of Alabama to protect the future of Alabama State and Alabama A&M, they should file their own litigation independent of any state government entity. And the reason for that is because you had to have your independence. And that's exactly what was needed in this case. So that's why when pressure would come, you would have people who were not obligated to the state or any particular entity to represent Alabama State and Alabama A&M. When Knight v. Alabama was found, Alabama was operating on a separate but unequal system of higher education, especially in regard to funding and program offerings. As the case unfolded, I was surprised at the depth of the neglect and the struggle that people had gone through to establish and maintain our institutions. I learned a lot from the history myself. I learned how our former presidents, when it came to the state of Alabama, when it came to your state appropriation, that in the Alabama legislature, which I had the opportunity to serve for a number of years, but not at this time, when our presidents would go to the Capitol for funding, they would have to sit out in the hall, and the other institutions would get their funding, and then they would call them in, and they would get what's left. But that was the way that they had to operate during those days with the Alabama legislature. Hopefully many things have changed when it comes to that, but we have done so much with so little. And this case has helped to put Alabama State as well as Alabama A&M University in a different posture and different position. The Civil Rights Act of 1964 forced the nation to reevaluate and implement race-neutral practices in education across the nation, where severe limitations in funding and program options continued to, because all of the judges had some connection to other higher institutions in the state of Alabama. So they decided to go to Rome, Georgia to find a federal judge. And I'm sure at the time that they were thinking that, they said, we'll go to Rome, Georgia, this little country town over there. We'll get who we want. Well, they happened to get a judge named Harold Murphy. And I'm going to tell you right now, in my opinion, and I'll tell him to his face, it was the best thing that happened to black education in the state of Alabama for him to be on that case. He was thorough, he was knowledgeable, he took his time, and he didn't play. Now, and that was how we end up getting the ruling that we got as it relates to that. Judge Murphy ruled that the vestiges of desegregation had impeded and unduly restricted ASU and A&M, and that the 14th Amendment required the state to eliminate those vestiges. The district court ordered policy changes and retained authority for 10 years to supervise those changes. Before that period ended, we also argued for another issue in the state of Alabama. We argued that underfunding had materially compromised the goals ordered by the district court, which included developing high-quality programs and increasing the ability of black students to attend college through scholarships and financial aid. We further maintained through another court action that maintained that Alabama property tax laws violated the Constitution because they were designated or designed to starve funding for education of blacks, and that the serious effect of underfunding continued to disproportionately harm students of color. This was one of the first times that the tax laws in the state of Alabama have been challenged as unconstitutional based on racial consideration. Of all of the victories and gains for Alabama A&M and Alabama State made in the Knight case, the one that is most important to me was the recognition that historically black institutions have a right to exist. Now that was important. Some people might say why? Because at that time, the trend in the state of Alabama was to get rid of your black institutions. I happened to attend a black high school. Well, that was the first thing when it came time for integration. We're going to integrate the black schools into the white schools. Well, that was what we were fighting for, to make sure that that did not happen in higher education. There had already been an attempt to merge Alabama State into Ormond and Montgomery, and we wanted to make certain that we would do everything within our power to make sure that it did not happen in higher education. The court case of ASU and A&M is the cornerstone of the future. Our missions were expanded because of this. Our governance changed. We made certain that we had independent boards of trustees to prepare us and to move our institutions in a different direction. Now, the court order, and like I said, it was 845 pages. It gave a lot to the institutions over a 10-year period. But it was up to the institutions to make the best of that court order. It's up to Alabama State, it's up to Alabama A&M, it's up to your board of trustees to make the decision on what direction you want to go as an institution. The court instructed them to come and recommend high demand programs. At Alabama State, we recommended programs like physical therapy, forensic science, and things of that nature. Those were high demand programs that anybody would want to attend, not necessarily just education or things of that nature. So those are some of the programs that we got as a result of the lawsuit. It also had the same opportunity for Alabama A&M, high demand programs, and to improve programs wherever you could. So the funding was put there for 10 years. During the course of that 10 years, our institutions were given the opportunity to design programs and to be as competitive as anybody else, and the funding would be there by court order. After that 10-year period, that funding would be rolled in to your O&M of the institution. Not cut out, but rolled in. Once it's rolled in, then it's subject to anything else that any institutions, if you have proration, the funding could be prorated. If the budgets were cut, it could be cut. But within that 10-year period, none of that could take place. But after the 10-year period, it could take place. So that has happened in the state. we're at the point now, so those programs that both institutions have developed, that we've got to fight to maintain them. We've got to fight to make certain that they are programs and that we'll meet whatever standards must be maintained. The other thing that was created as a result of the court order was a trust for excellence, an endowment for the universities, where the state would put up $1 million a year for a 10-year period. If this university would raise $1 million, so that would be $2 million per year that you would get in a trust for educational excellence. And there were some rules and restrictions put on that, that as you raise that money, that you could only spend 75% of the interest, and then it would roll over from year to year in perpetuity. So that was a good thing. That means that you'll always have a trust of excellence. At Alabama State, when I left, we were up to a total of about $96 million in the trust. 75% of the interest could be spent on anything, almost dealt with education. Now you couldn't go, he made it clear, you can't build a football stadium, you can't put it in athletic. It's got to negatively impact Alabama State as well as Alabama A&M. In January 1981, when the Department of Education found that the vestiges of former de jure system of higher education remained in Alabama public colleges and universities in violation of Title VI. The state of Alabama was directed to devise a plan of compliance. A week after the department's finding, was on January 15th, is when the lawsuit was filed. The first trial, and this will be very interesting to you, the first trial in the case, it was here because the federal government had filed the suit in the Northern District. I filed my case in the Southern District. So it was moved to the Northern District so we would combine the cases. So we petitioned the court to intervene in the Northern District and drop the case that I had in Alabama. So we became known as the night interveners in the federal government case that was filed in the Northern District. And to my surprise, once it was filed, the federal judge that was picked on that case happened to have been Judge U.W. Clement. Anybody ever heard of that name before? Federal Judge U.W. Clement. I was surprised, I think the state was surprised, but it fell in his lap. The first trial resulted in an order from Judge Clement in 1985, where District Judge U.W. Clement concluded that Alabama had operated a racially dual system of higher education until 1967, and that the vestiges had not been dismantled. The state was ordered by Judge Clement to submit a plan to correct the problem. My, we were happy that day. But little did I know that after that order came out, every TWI, traditional white institution in the state, filed an appeal to the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals. I thought the case, I said, oh, we're ready now to go on and try to get started on educating students. But no, that was not the case. And I could tell you some horror stories on some of the things I was told as a plaintiff in that case from presidents of TWIs in the state of Alabama. In terms of, I give you one, you all may win this, but you'll never enjoy it. Things of that nature. I mean, it was a hostile environment in the state of Alabama when it came to higher education. They never wanted this to happen. And to our fortune, U.W. Clement, he was very, astute federal judge. I remember one thing that was most impressive to me. He had made some ruling, I don't remember today what that ruling may have been. But all of the lawyers from the TWI, and they had about 50 there, from all the institutions other than Alabama State and A&M. He had made some ruling and they were objecting and they were telling him why. And he made one statement, the moving finger rights, now move on. That was so impressive to me. And all of them had to go and sit down. So it was appealed to the 11th Circuit. And they appealed it on the basis that Judge U.W. Clement had served in the Alabama legislature and that he had helped HBCUs, in particular Alabama State and A&M, in funding in their budgets. They also rule in there, just like I challenge Alabama State University. We have to get outside of our comfort zone. We got to get off of the campus. We got to be in the community. Things are changing and we've got to be competitive. Even on the high demand programs, we've got to be competitive. We must show that we are capable and that we are prepared to do everything that you do as an institution. When I see Ms. Laura Hall, who is a great representative from this area, will fight for you every day. Matter of fact, she will fight me over you every day of the week, and don't mind telling me that. But you got people like that in the legislative process. Worry them to death. Call her at home, call her at church, call her at the Capitol, tell her what you need. Tell her how much, and she can get it. Now, if anybody can get it, she can get it. I guarantee you that. And she doesn't bite her tongue. She will stand up for what's right and fight for A&M. But you've got to make certain that you give her something to fight with. That's the biggest struggle that we're in. Don't wait until something happens or the budget has passed to come and say, well, you know, we lost money this year. Be on top of that budget. Time the governor makes her recommendation on, I don't know when she's gonna make it this year, it's the second legislative day that they have to make the recommendation to the legislature. Look at what is being recommended for A&M, and if you're not satisfied, if there's some things that's been cut, your legislative delegation need to be aware of it. Because you can't wait until the budget comes out of committee, you can't wait until the budget passed and say we didn't get our fair share. I'm saying in conclusion this, the case was extremely important, but ladies and gentlemen, the case is over. If there's some problems now, it's going to be a different case. A different case at this day and time, I don't know where we would get, but it would depend on the particular issues. We never was in a position where we represented individual employees. We represented a class of individuals. So within our litigation, we didn't take on individual complaints. That's a different issue altogether. But the lawsuit itself gave us the opportunity to be what we want to be in this state. Research, doctoral granting universities. Take advantage of it. Many things are changing, as I said. When it comes to so many things like workforce development, dual enrollment, all of the innovative things that the state's putting money in now, be at the head table saying that we are prepared to offer that and we will participate in it. There's so much going on in this state and a lot of money out there. We got to find ways other than just the regular appropriation and the formula to get money. That's the way that the other schools operate. Get in the mainstream of economic development. Find out what your commerce department is doing. Find out where do they need help and support. State of Alabama and traditional white colleges and universities were permanently enjoined and restrained from maintaining vestiges of discrimination, from impeding desegregation of state colleges and universities, actions ordered by the court to finally and fully desegregate higher education were comprehensive in scope and specific. Faculty and administrative employment. This was another part of the lawsuit that a lot of people did recognize. Faculty and administrative employment for Auburn University, Calhoun, and our list of colleges, and most of your TWIs, were directed to recruit and employ more black administrators and faculty members. So for 10 years, we had to monitor or try to monitor what was going on at your TWI because they had not done a good job of integrating faculty members into their faculty as well as administrators. They had to give a report to the court on the efforts that were being put forth. Because I remember when we were complaining about that, I had one of the TWI presidents come to me and say, well, you know, we try to hire them, but they won't apply. We can't get them here at this university. I'm not going to call the university's name. And I said, well, tell me what position you have tried to attract a black faculty in, sir. He said, I've got a degree in a position in mechanical engineering that I need a black faculty. I said, let me tell you something. I say a person with a PhD in mechanical engineering ain't coming to this university, a black person now. So I said, what about in education? Have you got any there? What about in science? Have you got any there? So what I'm saying to you, this case was comprehensive in terms of trying to make certain that we recruited and tried to do the best we could within this state and making certain you had black faculty members and administrators employed. The state funded higher education and the portion of the Alabama Commission on Higher Education funding formula that reduced higher education appropriations based on average statewide tuition was modified, mainly because it hurt your traditionally black institutions more than it did your TWIs. A&M was awarded a total of $16 million. Troy State University of Montgomery was enjoined from expanding physical plant in Montgomery.